I happened to watch a documentary about Ernest Shackleton's voyage to Antarctica in the Endurance, his sailboat. They got stuck in the ice and they survived for over 500 days in Antarctica before they were rescued. And they all said that the reason they survived is that Shackleton insisted on optimism. He would not listen to anything other than optimism. They were going to survive. And they did. Every single member of his crew survived. So that's my background day to day. I have two different pictures of the Endurance. One of them is the Endurance under sail, and the other is the Endurance on the bottom of the ocean where it was recently found. And you can read the stern that says Endurance. But that's my message to my team these days. We are going to stay optimistic. We are going to keep fighting. We are protecting Medicaid, and whatever happens this year, we'll pivot. We'll find other ways if we need to make sure that low-income people don't lose out.
Welcome to Chief Influencer. I'm your host, Anthony Schaap, co-founder of Social Driver. Washington is the center of influence in the US and arguably the world. We are featuring leaders who figured out how to break through in today's fragmented and noisy world. Social Driver teamed up with the Communications Board and the George Washington University College of Professional Studies to recognize these leaders as chief influencers and highlight how they inspire and influence others. I am thrilled to introduce today's guest, Elizabeth G. Taylor, the Executive Director of the National Health Law Program, which is a nationally recognized legal nonprofit dedicated to protecting and advancing the health rights of low-income and underserved individuals. Before we dive in, here are a few things I think you should know about today's guest. Elizabeth started her career as a public defender representing the underserved in the District of Columbia. And ever since, she's focused on advancing justice both in the courtroom and in the boardroom. Number two, Elizabeth joined the National Health Law Program from the U.S. Department of Justice, where she served for 3 years as Principal Deputy Associate Attorney General during the Obama administration. While at DOJ, Elizabeth helped develop federal policy and litigation strategy regarding several federal health care initiatives, including the Affordable Care Act and emergency contraceptives. She also led negotiations on cases arising from the mortgage crisis and reviewed agency policies implementing the Supreme Court decision striking down the Defense of Marriage Act. And number three, Elizabeth has served as a partner to top law firm, Zuckerman Spader, and she clerked for Justice Harry Blackmun on the U.S. Supreme Court. Elizabeth, you have been called many things, from public defender to principal deputy associate attorney general, law firm partner, mom, even a divinity school graduate. Many call you a champion of the underserved. Well, today we're thrilled to call you a chief influencer. Welcome.
Thank you very much. I'm happy to be here.
I've been really looking forward to this conversation, Elizabeth, because of course the work that you do is always relevant, but especially right now, perhaps it's safe to say that it's more relevant than ever. And I think there are a lot of organizations that are trying to figure out how to get their message out across America to the public and to different stakeholders and policymakers. So we have a lot to talk about today from an influence perspective. But before we do that, I just, to start, wanted to ask if you could tell everyone about the National Health Law Program and how your career led you there.
I love to talk about the National Health Law Program, and our friends call us InHelp. Our acronym is NHELP, so I'll refer to the organization as InHelp.
I love that.
So InHelp has been around now for 55 years. It was started in a basement at the UCLA Law School in 1969. Our mission has been the same for the last 55 years, which is to protect and improve access to healthcare for low-income and underserved people. We've grown, obviously, over the last 55 years. We now have offices in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., and Chapel Hill, North Carolina. We have a staff of 55 people. So we've grown a lot, and we pursue the mission in a number of ways, which, will come up, I think, during the conversation. We for the first few years of our life, we were a federally funded backup center to legal services lawyers across the country. We were the health law experts backing up legal services organizations. We haven't gotten federal funding for that in a long time, but we still provide that support to state partners in all 50 states and DC. And it's a really important part of who we are, of our DNA. We do some California-focused advocacy, given our grounding in California. We do federal advocacy from our DC office, working on the Hill and with the administration. And we litigate. So that makes us stand out from a lot of health policy organizations. We have a deep litigation bench enforcing Medicaid and the ACA and civil rights laws that impact healthcare. So we have a lot of tools in our arsenal. It's a great organization. I feel really lucky to be here. So I'll tell you how I landed here. As you noted, I started life after clerkships as a public defender. I did that for 8 years. Loved it. I love walking into court with someone beside me who, for whom I am the only translator really of the justice system, and giving somebody a sense that they actually have a stake in the justice system. It's a privilege to play that role. It's also sobering, because if you're really good, you can keep people out of jail, which is very important. But it's hard to change lives by the time that you pick somebody up in the cell block underneath the Metropolitan Police Department or the DC courts. And so, my career has taken various turns along the way, most of them not planned. But after a few years at DOJ, after learning, a veneer of health law, I had the opportunity to lead the National Health Law Program. So I've been here 11 years. I've learned a ton over the 11 years. And I really bring the passion and the commitment that I developed as a public defender, that if we're going to give low-income kids a chance to succeed, we've got to start early and make sure that they have the services and the resources that they need to really have a chance to succeed. So I marry my public defender passion and my healthcare advocate passion, because it's really all about justice and fairness, and giving everyone in this country a chance to thrive, which is our vision.
Elizabeth, it just occurs to me that, you were, as a public defender, you had a caseload of a handful of individuals. And in this role, you're sort of a different type of public defender for a much larger community of people, which is a big responsibility. It's a big undertaking. And some of the skills and the tools that you developed as a public defender probably translate really well to that. But then you've developed other tools and skills that help you do that at scale. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I am very comfortable speaking in front of, an audience. I spoke to a bunch of donors a year or so ago, and one of the people said, I could imagine you in front of the jury, giving your closing argument. So it's talking to people. One of the things that you're told as a baby public defender is just talk to the people.
Yes.
And so, that's what we do. We connect with people and tell stories, and try to communicate why the work that we're doing matters, and why the people that we are trying to protect matter and need to matter.
I'd love to ask you a little bit about that. So I've never, served on a jury or been in a courtroom in that environment, but I did write for a legal newspaper for a while. It got to cover the law a little bit. And I imagine when you're speaking to a jury, you're having to develop arguments and messaging that are going to, resonate with different people depending on their own lived experiences and and sometimes we hear from our chief influencers, you have to speak to the head and you have to speak to the heart, combine data and storytelling. So when you kind of shared earlier that if you keep people out of jail, that's good, but by the time you meet them in the cell block, it can be really difficult to change their lives. It occurs to me that some folks, and when I say people, this could be policymakers, this could be others, might be really motivated by that human story of changing someone's life. But others, they might really be looking at the cost benefit analysis of if we provide early intervention and keep someone out of the criminal justice system, that might save money, that might have more of an economic impact.
Yeah.
And so those are sort of different ways that you might approach it. And I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that, because you obviously have to have an overarching narrative about the why, which you shared very well, but then you have to customize that, to meet the, what different stakeholders are looking for. And so I don't know, maybe you could just share a little bit about your approach to that and if I'm on the right track there.
Well, you're right. And, particularly in the role that I'm in now, we have multiple audiences, all of whom are important. One of our really important audiences is the state advocates that we support. So InHelp is filled with technical experts. I mean, we can tell you all about Medicaid regulations and why this provision, matters and that provision matters. And that kind of technical expertise is really valuable to our state advocate partners because they need the legal nitty gritty to represent their clients. And so, that's an audience for which that sort of technical expertise is important. For policymakers, they often, want data, and some heart, why does it matter? What do their constituents care about? Our foundation partners want to know what impact we're going to have with the funding that they give us. Our individual donors, want to know why this work matters. And there's a through line for all of it, which is the stories of the people whose lives are really directly impacted by the work that we do. And so one of the things that we do with our state partners is to help their clients tell their stories. And we do that in different ways. We've had a project to help actually videotape or transcribe the stories of Medicaid enrollees so that their own lived experiences can be used to help shape policy. We also created a website called My Care Counts, and we've done training to enable our state partners to help their constituents get engaged in the administrative advocacy process. So, administrative advocacy seems like, oh my God, those Washington lawyers, let them do that. But it's really important for the policymakers to understand what the impact of a regulation is going to be. And what better than to have the people whose lives are directly impacted know how to tell their story, into a comment portal that's going to the Department of Health and Human Services, because Health and Human Services, they have to read those comments and react to them. So it's a way to make sure that the people's voices are heard in all kinds of ways, but including in the administrative advocacy project, as well as, tugging on the heartstrings of the people that we want to have supporting us. And we actually have a group of people that we call our Board of Ambassadors. And they don't have no fiduciary obligations. They're not board members. It's a large group of people who just care about our mission and believe in the work that we do. And we brief them. So, we tell them about what we're doing and why it matters. And then they can take those stories and share them with their connections through social media, through individual contacts. So, they're our chief influencers. but
Sure.
this group of people that agrees to help tell the story of why this matters.
I love that. You know, some organizations only have a fiduciary board and they play obviously an important role. And in your case, having this board of ambassadors that, like you say, or it's a kind of a volunteer role, but that they can help to amplify that message. To me, it sounds like that's really an important kind of under the hood component of how InHelp gets its message out and reaches the right people across the country.
There's no one way to get the message out, particularly if you do what we do, which tends to be pretty technical. Um,
Mhm.
it has to be translated into, terms that people understand so that they get why it matters. So the Board of Ambassadors is a really important tool that we use, but we have a full communication strategy. We are constantly, writing papers that may be shared with people on the Hill, people in the administration, with reporters, to explain what's at stake in some of the some of the proposals that may sound innocuous or even sound like a good idea. Um, we explain what's really at stake, and we provide those explanations on our website, sent out to
Right.
reporters, sent to funders. I talk about it. So the communication of what we are doing and um, getting a broader public understanding of the Medicaid program and the challenges to the Medicaid program and the people who are impacted is it's a multifaceted effort of communication.
Absolutely. And I want to dive into a couple of those other areas. Let me go back for a second. You talked about My Care Counts and how you get um, individuals to share their stories through public comment. And some people may not be familiar with how public comment works. You said, they HHS has to read these comments, and that's actually a little different from if somebody writes a letter to their member of Congress.
Right.
You know, you hope that they read it, but there's kind of a legal. Can you talk about that a little bit for folks who may not be
Yeah,
familiar with
sure.
that nuance?
Sure. And, this is one of the ways where, having a litigation arm as well as an advocacy arm is really valuable, because the administrative record is what goes into court. So, if there's a regulation and we or somebody else want to challenge the decision that is made by HHS or a regulation, we may go into court and say it was arbitrary and capricious. That's a legal term, for the secretary to approve this waiver. And what the court uses to decide whether we're right or wrong, in addition to legal arguments and reading the statute, is the administrative record. So, for instance, in the first Trump administration, we brought a number of lawsuits with our state partners challenging waivers by the Secretary of HHS, approving work requirements as a condition of being enrolled in Medicaid. And the Medicaid statute is about making sure that people have access to healthcare services. The administrative record showed that in Kentucky, 200,000 people were going to be dropped off of the Medicaid rolls if work requirements went into effect. So that record is what the judge used to say to the government, how can this be consistent with the Medicaid statute if instead of providing healthcare services, you're going to drop 200,000 people
Right.
off of the Medicaid rolls? So, understanding why the administrative record is so important helped us realize it's going to be really valuable to get not just advocates like us, but also experts. I mean, you want the
Yeah.
administrative record to have data and facts. The stories are good, but the data about how many people were going to be dropped off, it was really important to have that in the administrative record. And so, we're communicate one of the ways we communicate is in court. And sometimes we have to explain to the judge, there's all of this language about work requirements being, helping people get back to work, and able-bodied adults, should work. here's what's really at stake. And this is how you know what's really at stake, because it's in the administrative record.
This episode is brought to you by the George Washington University's College of Professional Studies. With in-person and online programs ranging from master's degrees in public relations strategy to certificate programs in digital communications, GW offers more than just the credentials to help working professionals get ahead. It prepares them to be leaders in their field. I'm a proud GW graduate myself, and I can attest that the faculty members combine academic rigor with real-world lessons that can't always be found in textbooks. Check out cps.gwu.edu for more information. So, thank you for explaining that about the administrative record, because people may not really understand or have understood before you shared it, the importance of that, and that's a component of your influence to make that argument to a judge, to build, those arguments. And to get that administrative record, you have to convince experts to provide that, those data points like the one that you shared, but you also are trying to get stories from real people who will be affected.
Yes.
And I want to talk about that because I think that there are so many people across the country who just might not think their voice matters, have probably never submitted a public comment or know how to do it, or have written their member of Congress or anything, maybe not even voted. I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about, you mentioned your state partner strategy, but also just your approach to do that, because if people don't recognize the impact they can make, obviously then it doesn't give you the information that you need in the record. And you've been really successful at collecting thousands and thousands, or getting thousands and thousands of people to submit those public comments. So you've obviously figured out how to do it really well.
Well, yes, and it's not just in the administrative records. It's important for people to tell their stories in other ways and to other audiences. So, when we have stories, we take those stories to funders and donors and policymakers. You started off talking about heart and head. This is both heart and head. When you watch a video of someone who talks about trying to get health care for their child and the obstacles that they had to go to because they kept getting dropped from the Medicaid rolls, and how desperate they were, traveling to the capital of the state and trying to, so it's that kind of story that influences judges, it influences policymakers. You have to combine it with the data as well and the analysis. And that's why our sort of multifaceted group of partners and staff members and friends, they're all important to this collective work of getting the message out there. I just don't think there are many people in this country who do not understand why Medicaid matters so much. And they also don't understand that Medicaid isn't just a stopgap measure, until somebody gets back on their feet. There are so many people in this country who are working low-income jobs, often variable hours. They're not getting health care through their employer. And they are never going to be able, on their own to afford health insurance. And if they don't have health insurance, they're not going to get preventive care. And they're going to be in it, and it's a spiral down. So Medicaid is hugely important for 80 million people in this country are enrolled in Medicaid and CHIP. So the stakes, when you start talking about cutting Medicaid or changing the program, you're talking about an enormous number of people whose lives are impacted by those changes. A third of the children in this country are getting their health care through the Medicaid program, and we owe them a chance to be healthy and to thrive.
Yeah. I want to talk a little bit about just what's going on in Washington right now, because you've alluded to it. And by the time this interview airs, things are changing by the day, by the minute, so it's probably, who knows what'll be going on. But there's this obvious push for what's called government efficiency and significant cost reduction, including in programs like Medicaid. And how do you get that message that you're describing to sink in with the people that most need to hear it. Just love to hear kind of any advice you have or how you're grappling with that right now.
We are doing everything that we can to try to prevent Congress from cutting Medicaid. That's the thing that is top on our mind right now. As you said, by the time anybody's watching this podcast, who knows what will have happened. But we've been hearing that for quite a while, that members of Congress want to really, really save money by cutting Medicaid. The House budget resolution calls for $880 billion in cuts in Medicaid over the next 10 years. And that would slash healthcare for low-income people, across the country. So sometimes words are used like per capita caps and block grants, and they're terms that people don't understand. And so this is something Congress should be working on, and I don't understand. So we try to make sure that it's not hard to understand what a block grant is or what a per capita cap is. It's just cutting Medicaid by, different means of getting to the same goal, which is saving money by cutting back on healthcare for low-income people. So we have a dedicated web. If you go to our website, the first thing you see is Medicaid Defense, because that is what we are about right now. We are writing constantly, pretty short papers explaining, here's what's at stake in a per capita cap. Here's what's at stake in a block grant. Here's what's at stake in a work requirement. Here's what the impact would be on working people across the country. So we try to translate the technical stuff into language that ordinary people understand and are motivated to do something about. And we also, just to go back to our state advocates, the little hope that we have right now is that we're hearing that even some Republican members of Congress who might otherwise be expected to go along are hearing from their constituents. Wait, don't cut our health care. So it's really important for us to work with the state advocates, figure out what are the issues in your state that people are worried about. Is it substance use disorder? Is it behavioral health issues? Is it, childcare issues? Where are the levers that are going to move the needle in your state? And what do you need from us to be able to get that message out there so that the people in the state will call their members of Congress and say, whoa, don't take away my health care.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of what we're doing. We're providing those kinds of materials to staffers on the Hill, to reporters. We've got our board of ambassadors going. I've even got my children, calling their members of Congress from the different states that they're living in. This is just hugely important. Just, the whole essential nature of the Medicaid program could be changed. And it's just too important a program to let that happen.
You talked a lot about your state partners, and I want to kind of spend a little time about partnerships, because I know that is so important to the work that you do. Your organization has grown a lot over the decades, but still, it's a limited size organization, and you have to leverage the power of partners at the state level and across the United States. So I thought maybe you could tell us a little bit more about those partnerships, but in particular, I'd love to hear your perspective as a leader about how to build strong partnerships and strong coalitions so that you can achieve more together than you could alone. Because that's something that, you've done, I think, in other parts of your career as well, but you've done very effectively, obviously, at InHelp. And many listeners might be thinking about partnerships that they're trying to galvanize, or new partnerships they're trying to build, or coalitions. So what lessons do you have for folks who are really trying to build and maximize partnerships and coalitions?
We hear frequently that InHelp is a good partner. And that's one of the nicest things that you can say to us, because we try to be a good partner. We are partners with a number of national organizations, so we join together with other organizations with similar goals to try to protect Medicaid, to protect children's health, to protect sexual and reproductive health. We are involved with a number of coalitions trying to protect sexual and reproductive health. And we try to do it confident enough of who we are and what we bring to the table that we don't need sharp elbows. And we can listen and say, what's our value add here? And so I think that's an important approach to saying, let's talk and figure out how we combine our resources in a way that we're not stepping on each other's toes, and we're, and the sum is greater than the parts. It's particularly important in our relationships with state partners that we listen first and don't come in and say, we're the powerful national organization and let us fix what's wrong in your state. That would be a really bad idea. So, we ask our state partners, what do you need from us? How can we help? We have a group of sexual and reproductive health partners in the South, and our main function is really just to give them a space to be together, to support each other, to share their ideas, to figure out what's going to work. And then if they ask us to do a training on something, we're happy to do that. But we listen first. And the other thing that we've done that we are very excited about, starting in 2017, we started a program that we call Health Law Partnerships. We got the first money that we got in 2017 to be able to pass through some funding to state partners. It's not a lot of money, but it's enough that it makes a difference in their ability to devote resources to the partnership. And so we're now up to 20 health law partners. We'd like to have 50 plus. But it's been so effective in creating sort of the backbone of a lot of the litigation that we've brought since 2017. They've also been really important during the COVID unwinding, as things were just, chaotic, as states were trying to, re-enroll people in Medicaid. And so I hope that we'll be able to continue to do that, to be good partners, and also to pass through some funding to our state partners, because we feel like we operate on a shoestring, and they really, really operate on a shoestring. That they feel like that's being a good partner too, when we can bring them some much needed funding.
Absolutely. Goes, even the modest support would probably go a really long way in building goodwill and also building that capacity. You talked about listening a lot, and I just want to ask you to maybe go a little deeper on that, or just share a little, because when you hear, gosh, you have these partners all across the country listening, how do you listen to so many organizations? How do you structure that? How do you make sure that you do have the opportunity to listen, because it's not a small number, and it's not as easy as just sit down for coffee with everybody, because you probably can't do that.
I know, and it sounds great when I say that, and it's never quite as easy as just we're gonna listen. We do it in different ways depending on who the partners are. We create space for partners, like our state partners, to share ideas with each other. So, we have a big listserv, a confidential listserv, and sometimes we don't even need to be involved. Some advocate from Maine will say, I've got this issue. Has anybody ever dealt with that before? And somebody from South Carolina will say, well, look at this provision of the statute and try that. So, we facilitate the sharing of information, and, with our one-on-ones with state partners, we really do just say, what are the issues? We can't work on everything. What do you think are the big things that are coming down the pike in your state that we need to focus on? We'll bring to that, some knowledge of what's actually happening in Washington and what we see coming down the pike and what we're worried about. So it's, it's a dialogue. we're just really uh, clear that we're not the saviors from Washington D.C. Um, who are going to fix things. I was trying a case once in Southern Virginia, and the prosecutor, and I grew up in North Carolina, not too far from the Virginia line, and the prosecutor said, "Well, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Miss Taylor came down from Washington D.C., for this case." And I stood up and I said, "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, I grew up just over the North Carolina line." I'm not just from Washington D.C., but there's something about that, that people are more receptive when when you're not just the big savior from Washington D.C.
Yeah. Well, I think you've talked about that. I love that anecdote about, look, I'm one of you, I'm not just coming in from the outside. And you gave several examples of how you elevate voices of real people and experts and partners so that part of influence is showing that, I have that credibility, that, we're one of you, we can relate to you. And I think that that's such an important element of influence. And I love those examples you gave about listening. It's two-way, it's you're sharing your expertise, you're asking them, but also you're creating space and opportunities for them to learn from one another. Because to me, it sounds like if you can get two state partners to learn from one another, you may not have to be in the middle, answering the questions or doing that, but by facilitating that opportunity, you've really added value for both of them. You've deepened that relationship, and then they're going to be there for you and for, the movement when you need them for something. And I think those are really great takeaways.
The partners that we work with in states are so wise, and there's so many, there's some new advocates coming along, who are learning the ropes. There are also some people that we've been partnering with for a really long time who are quite wise, and we're happy to learn from them.
To close, I just wanted to ask you, a lot of our chief influencers have gotten inspiration of how they influence from outside of their own day job or industry. Elizabeth, where have you gotten inspiration?
Well, I wish that I could change my Zoom background to show you what it is most of the time these days. I happened to watch a documentary about Ernest Shackleton's voyage to Antarctica in the Endurance, his sailboat. They got stuck in the ice, and they survived for over 500 days in Antarctica before they were rescued. And they all said that the reason they survived is that Shackleton insisted on optimism. He would not listen to anything other than optimism. They were going to survive. And they did. Every single member of his crew survived. So that's my background day to day. I have two different pictures of the Endurance. One of them is the Endurance under sail, and the other is the Endurance on the bottom of the ocean where it was recently found. And you can read the stern that says Endurance. But that's my message to my team these days. We are going to stay optimistic. We are going to keep fighting. We are protecting Medicaid, and whatever happens this year, we'll pivot. We'll find other ways if we need to make sure that low-income people don't lose out.
I'm going to have to go watch that documentary now. That sounds like such an inspirational story. And I think it comes through that you're not going to give up the fight. And you've been fighting since you started as a public defender for individuals, now fighting for the 80 million Americans that depend on these programs. Your message is very clear. Medicaid is essential for the health of Americans, so we do not want to see cuts. You have a very clear, concise message, but getting that message out has a multifaceted strategy. And you talked about My Care Counts as an opportunity to get individuals to share their stories, and why the public commenting process and the administrative record is so important, getting the expert voices there. And you shared that great example in Kentucky that was used through the law. And then you talked so much about the key partnerships that you build. And really, I just loved the way you even talked about how wise your partners are and how much you depend on them and how you facilitate dialogue, not only between your organization and the partners, but among the partners. And so many lessons about influence that we learned from you today. Folks can definitely hear why you were selected as a chief influencer. And Elizabeth, I just want to say thank you so much for sharing your story with us, especially at a time that I know is very busy. So we really appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity. I've enjoyed the chat.
Chief Influencer is a production of Social Driver. We help clients transform complexity into clarity with people-centered strategies. Whether you're looking to elevate the influence of your brand or your leaders, check out socialdriver.com to learn more. For show notes or to nominate a guest, visit us at chiefinfluencer.org or follow Chief Influencer on LinkedIn.